So we now know what Apple's plans are with regards to new Macs in 2024, which means that hopefully a lot of you are going to be taking delivery of a brand new shiny Mac computer very soon. It's been a while since I made a video where I talk about the way that I like to set my Mac computers up when they're brand new and fresh out of the box, so this felt like as good a time as any. So in this video, I'm going to show you the settings that I tend to change, the tweaks that I tend to make, and just a few tips here and there that I use every time that I set up a brand new Mac computer to hopefully get you up and running as quickly and effectively as possible. Okay, let's get into it. So this first tip is unique to any Mac with a trackpad, whether that's the built-in trackpad or whether it's an external one. But one of the first things that I like to do is I like to go to the trackpad settings and enable tap to click. So by default, you have to physically press down quite hard on the trackpad to click on something. And I personally don't like that. I just like to be able to do everything with a gentle tap instead. So to access this, go to System Settings, scroll down and choose Trackpad from the left-hand side. Tap to click is located at the bottom and it will be disabled by default, so you'll want to enable that. I also make sure that secondary click is set to a click or tap with two fingers, which works like a right click. It's kind of an unusual method to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, it works really well. I also tend to set my tracking speed a bit faster than the default, but that's very much down to your personal preference. Everything else, everything in scroll and zoom and more gestures, I tend to leave all of that as it is. Oh, and there is one other trackpad setting that I always enable, but it's not in the trackpad menu. It's kind of hidden away in accessibility. So if you go to settings, choose accessibility and scroll down to pointer control. Here you'll see an option called trackpad options. Tap into this and toggle on use trackpad for dragging. Then in the dragging style drop-down menu, choose 3-finger drag. So with this enabled, you can use 3 fingers to drag windows or files around on your Mac really easily. And I personally find it much easier to use this than the standard method. On the flip side of that, if you're using a mouse, I would definitely recommend taking a couple of moments to change some of the mouse settings. So again, go to System Settings and choose Mouse from the left-hand side. Personally, I prefer a quicker mouse tracking speed, so I tend to set that quite fast, but you should adjust this to your preference. One setting that I always change is secondary click. I make sure that it's set to click right side, which means that if I'm using a Magic Mouse, I can click on the right-hand side and it will work as a right click, just like it would on a Windows PC. I would also definitely recommend checking out Moz for Mac. It's a free app that runs in the background of your Mac. It's super lightweight, so don't worry about it taking up any of your system resources or anything like that. Moz makes scrolling on your Mac much smoother, and it's particularly useful if you use an external display because it fixes a lot of the scrolling issues that you have with external displays and some Bluetooth mice like the Logitech one that I use. In terms of the keyboard, there isn't much that I would change, to be honest, although one thing related to the keyboard is Touch ID. I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you probably have an M-powered Mac, and any M-powered Mac either comes with Touch ID built into the keyboard or it's compatible with a Touch ID enabled keyboard. So if you're using Touch ID, I would definitely recommend setting up a couple of additional fingers alongside the main one that you use for logging in. If you go to Touch ID and password on the left-hand side, you should see the finger that you set up when you first configured your Mac, but you can add up to 3 fingerprints. I definitely recommend using the Add Fingerprint button and adding a finger from your other hand, maybe even a thumb. You'll be surprised how often you want to use Touch ID, and it's more convenient to use one of your other fingers instead of the one that you normally use. Oh, and one other thing that I would mention is the Apple Watch settings at the bottom of the Touch ID and password section. I won't spend long on this because you might not have an Apple Watch, but if you do, I would recommend allowing your Apple Watch to unlock your Mac. You just toggle it on for whichever Apple Watch you have, and then every time that you sit down and open your Mac to log in, as long as you're wearing your Apple Watch, the Mac will unlock automatically. So part of setting up a new Mac for me is making sure that my new Mac is running at its absolute best. And that's where the all-new CleanMyMac comes in. Thanks to the guys at CleanMyMac for sponsoring today's video. You might be familiar with CleanMyMac. It's been around since 2008, but this latest update is more than just a lick of paint, although it does look good. It all starts with a scan using the dedicated SmartCare button, but this is also where the app gets really interesting because I can really drill down into how my Mac is performing and make meaningful improvements. Cleanup lets me remove up to 27% more junk than previous versions of the app, whether it's system cache files, development leftovers, or unnecessary files clogging up my machine. My favorite part of the app is the brand new My Clutter section. I can dive into my downloads and quickly get rid of duplicates and similar photos. There's the Moonlock anti-malware engine, which scans my Mac and removes viruses, and there's even an assistant, which helps me tackle things like battery drain and overheating, along with other helpful tips. If you're interested in making sure that your Mac is performing at its absolute best, the all-new CleanMyMac is available to purchase from the MacPaw website, the App Store, or Setapp. Get a 7-day free trial via the link in the description of this video. Another part of my Mac that I always like to make changes to straight away is the dock. So to do that, head to System Settings and choose Desktop and Dock from the left-hand side. The first thing that I like to do is enable the automatically hide and show dock setting. With this enabled, the dock will disappear by default when I'm not using it, and all I have to do is move my cursor to the bottom of the screen to access it. Screen real estate is obviously at a premium on Mac laptops, so I think this is a really useful feature. I also like to change the minimize windows using setting from Genie effect to scale effect. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it is a bit quicker when you minimize windows using this feature rather than the Genie effect. In the double-click a Windows title bar 2 menu, I like to change this from zoom to tile window to screen. With this enabled, if you double-click the title bar of an open window, it will expand to take up the full width and height of the screen. Further down this page, there are a few other settings that I like to change as well. Show suggested and recent apps in dock is a setting that I don't really like. This is where you have suggestions for apps that you might want to open on the right-hand side of the dock, and I prefer to disable this to keep the dock nice and tidy. The click wallpaper to reveal desktop feature is something that I personally hate, so I have this set to only in Stage Manager, and I don't use Stage Manager, so it's never really an issue for me. You'll need to play around with this to see what you think. Essentially, it's a feature where you can click on the wallpaper to jump straight to the desktop from whatever you're doing. I find that it really brings me out of my productive flow, so I don't use it. Further down in the window tiling section, I've grown to really like the tiled windows having margins feature, but of course, you can disable this if it's not for you. I also like the hold option key while dragging windows to tile option. And with this enabled, you can hold the option key and you just kind of flick a window to the left or right to tile them. Another setting that I change is in mission control, and that's group windows by application. I like to have this enabled. So with this setting, when you access mission control, if you have multiple instances of the same app open, so Safari windows, for example, they'll all be grouped together and it makes mission control much neater. The other change that I make to the dock is something that you have to do directly within the dock itself, over by the bin or the trash can, whatever you call it. I right click here, and then one of the settings I adjust is removing the downloads folder from the dock. I prefer to access my downloads folder from Finder, so I right click, go to options and remove it from the dock. Lastly, I always spend a few minutes cleaning up my dock. I remove any apps from the dock that I don't think I'll frequently use or that just don't add much value. Screen real estate is obviously at a premium down here. Keep in mind that you're not deleting the app, you're just removing them from the dock, and you can still access them anytime that you need to. I also like to change a setting related to my display brightness. If you go to System Settings and then choose Displays from the left-hand side, I tend to disable the automatically adjust brightness option and set my brightness to the level that I prefer. This is just a personal preference. I find that my Macs, especially my MacBooks, tend to err on the side of being quite dark if I leave this on. Also head to Settings, then Battery, and then Options, and disable slightly dim the display on battery. I also have True Tone enabled, which is where the display changes color warmth to match the ambient lighting in your room. I really like it, but if you tend to work with real color a lot, say editing photos or graphic design, this is a feature that you might want to disable. Okay, let's talk about Finder for a moment. And this one is really important because you are going to spend a lot of time in Finder, so it is worth setting this up exactly the way that you like it. So open a Finder window, then tap on Finder at the top of the screen and choose Settings. So the first thing that I tend to do is remove external disks and CDs, DVDs, and iPods from visibility on the desktop. To be fair, this only applies if you actually have external disks, CDs, DVDs, and iPods connected, and I suspect that's less and less of it these days. Essentially, with these options unticked, even if you plug them in, they won't show on your desktop. You'd need to go into Finder and access them that way, which is what I prefer. In the new Finder window show drop-down menu, I changed this from Recents, which is the default option. Now, when setting up my computer, I would typically set up a NAS storage device and have it automatically connect, as that's where the majority majority of the files that I use for work are stored. I don't currently have this set up on this particular Mac, so for the sake of this example, I'll choose desktop, but essentially this setting is asking you what you'd like to see every time that you open a new Finder window, whether it's your documents, downloads, desktop. I would definitely recommend setting this to whatever you access most often. I also enable sync desktop and documents folders so that any documents stored on my desktop and in my documents folder are synced with iCloud Drive. I own a bunch of Macs, and so this means I can access all the files across all my different Macs, my iPhone, my iPads, etc. Next, I click on the tags option and I disable all of them. I personally do not use tags, so this isn't a feature that I want to see. In the sidebar section, there are several items that I would remove. This is all about cleaning up the sidebar in Finder. So I get rid of AirDrop. I'll explain why in just a moment. I leave iCloud as it is, but I scroll down to locations and remove CDs, DVDs, and iOS devices, cloud storage, and Bonjour computers. I actually leave connected servers enabled because, like I already mentioned, I do have a server that I connect to, and I want to be able to see that in the sidebar. Finally, I choose advanced, and in here, I enable show all file name extensions. The Mac has this slightly annoying habit where it assumes that you know what all the different files on your computer are based on the file name in a preview, and that isn't always the case. It can get really confusing when you're viewing documents like PDFs, text documents, or images. It isn't always clear what type of file that you're looking at, so I prefer to have show all file names extensions enabled. This way I can see the file extension and I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I also enable remove items from the bin after 30 days. This does exactly what it sounds like. Items will be removed from your bin after being there for 30 days. I don't leave files in there for 30 days personally, but it is still a useful feature. I disable show warning before removing from iCloud Drive. This is a feature where if you move a file from, say, your iCloud desktop to a different folder, you get a prompt warning you that you're about to remove a file from iCloud Drive. I typically know when I'm removing a file from iCloud Drive, so I don't need to be told, but you might find it useful to keep this enabled. Finally, at the bottom of the screen, in the when performing a search field, I change the option from search this Mac to search the current folder. If you have it set to search this Mac, every time that you search for something using the magnifying glass in the Finder window, your Mac will search the entire system. The way that I work is if I'm looking for a specific file, I'm usually in the folder where I know it's kept. So I prefer to have this set to just search the current folder. You can always change it when you're performing a search if you want, but there is still more to change in the Finder window. The next thing that I tend to do is right-click on the toolbar at the top of the Finder window. Just to point out, there are 3 view settings for how you can display features in your toolbar: icon and text, icon only, and text only. The icons can be a bit confusing at first, but I'm at the point where I know pretty much all of the ones that I use, so I prefer icon only to keep it clean, but you can of course choose whichever you prefer. What I do next is right-click again and choose Customize Toolbar. This will show a window just below the toolbar with all the available options that you can add to the toolbar if you wish. To remove something, drag it from the toolbar to the bottom. To add something, drag it from the options below up into the toolbar. I typically remove the group option and tags, and then I add AirDrop. This is why I removed AirDrop from the sidebar a minute ago. I prefer to have it here in the toolbar. I also add the create new folder option because I find it easier to access it from the toolbar than through any of the other methods. Those are all the options that I include in my toolbar, but there are obviously lots more that you could add if you wanted to. And when you're done, click done. In terms of viewing items in Finder, I always use list view. I find anything else too distracting. And just to point out, if you want to AirDrop a file, the way that I've set this up makes it really easy. You just select the file, then click the AirDrop button in the toolbar. You can then choose who you'd like to AirDrop it to. Similarly, to create a new folder, just tap the new folder button. On that note, something many people don't realize is that you can add files, folders, and applications to the toolbar. To do this, use the folder that you just created as an example. Press and hold the Command key on your keyboard and drag the folder into the toolbar. It will stay there in every Finder window. To do this with an app, go to Applications on the sidebar, find the app that you want to add, press and hold the Command key and drag it into the toolbar. Finally, I go to View and enable a couple of options. First, I enable Show Path Bar. This creates a bar at the bottom of each Finder window that shows the path that you've taken to get to that particular folder. So if you ever find yourself several layers deep in a Finder window, this tool makes it much easier to navigate back. I also go back to View and enable Show Status Bar. This shows the number of items contained in each folder and the available storage space on the drive that you're currently using. Honestly, at this point, I've pretty much got my Mac set up the way that I like it, but there are still a few tweaks that I might make. So I would go to System Settings and then choose Siri from the options on the left-hand side. I enable Siri because I do use it from time to time on my Mac. However, the important distinction is that once I've enabled it, I don't enable the Listen For feature. You can have your voice assistant listen out for certain phrases, but I don't like to do this when I'm working at my computer. I find the better way to activate Siri is to simply press and hold the microphone button, which on newer M-powered Macs is the F5 key. Alternatively, you can use the Siri icon in the menu bar at the top of your screen. If you're enjoying the content here, why not sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is all about tech news and tips delivered free to your inbox each Friday. Sign up via the QR code on screen or the link in the description of this video. As for Safari, there isn't a huge amount that I change here, but because I use Safari all day, every day, I do change a few settings here. So I open the browser, and the first thing that I typically do is go to View at the top of the screen and ensure that Show Favorites bar is enabled. This is the bar of bookmarks that I've saved as favorites at the top of the screen, and I like having these for quick access on my work profile. I've also got one on my personal profile, so I would enable that as well. Next, I click into Settings and make sure that the Open Save Files After Downloading option is disabled, as it is enabled by default. With this setting on, any file that you download automatically opens. So if you download a movie or a picture, it opens as soon as it downloads. I don't like this because I don't always want to view a file as soon as I've downloaded it. I prefer to open it at my own pace. In terms of file settings, there is only one real change that I tend to make here, and that's to change the default app that specific file types open with. For instance, on my Mac, every time that I open an image file, I want it to open with the app CleanShot X because I tend to do most of my light image editing in that app. But by default, on a brand new Mac, image files will always open with Preview, and I don't want that. So to change this, I locate any image file on my computer, right-click it, and choose Get Info. In the Info window on the left-hand side, go to the Open With section and click on the drop-down menu to change the default app from Preview to the app that you want to use. You might choose Photoshop or another app. Then click Change All and confirm by pressing Continue. This ensures that every time that you open a similar type of file, in this case image files, they'll open by default in the app that you've selected. This becomes your new default, and you might also do this for movie files or any other file types, choosing the app that you prefer to open each time. The great thing is you only need to do this once, and it will work for every file that you open moving forward. So there you go. Those are the main settings that I like to change every time that I'm setting up a new Mac. I think that this is a pretty exhaustive list, but there are definitely still some changes that you could make. What about you? Any specific changes that you like to make when you set up a new Mac? Drop me a comment and let me know. And as ever, if you found this video useful, do please consider leaving me a like and subscribing to my channel for more content like this in the future. See you on the next video.